Hey, everybody. We're back talking about Noah's Ark in our study of Genesis. And what we're going to look at here are just some answers to some of the harder questions. They're not really that hard, but that people ask. And these are legitimate questions. They should be answered, they need to be answered. And as we'll see, they can be answered. So, the story of Noah has been the subject of many art depictions for a very long time. Here you can see an artist depicting, all the animals and the ark there in the background. Here's another one, probably a little bit more accurate in terms of its shape from what we know. And they're rightly including dinosaurs there. So, just some questions that we will answer. Um, how big was the ark? Is it big enough? How could Noah collect two of every kind? Where did all the water come from for the flood? What did they do for food? How could it be enough for 8 people and all the animals? What about water? They need to drink. What about animal waste? Was the flood a global or local flood? People actually ask that. So the question is, well, how big was it? Well, I don't know about you, but I typically grew up with pictures like this. And so they have a tiny little ark crammed with animals. It looks cute and nice. And it puts in your mind that it's a fairy tale, that it isn't true, and it looks silly and it couldn't be big because we have the wrong ideas. As I'm going to show you, it's actually much bigger. And just as an aside, I don't know if this is something you really want to put in your kid's room because it's the greatest judgment of God and death of billions of people in the history of the universe. So, not something really cute to put in your kid's room. Anyway, that's just my own comment. So let's look at the size. Well, the size, it's enormous. Uh, it measures 300 cubits or 510 feet by 51 feet high or 30 cubits and 50 cubits wide. The length, just to put it in perspective, is about 1.5 football fields. We'll look at this a little bit more, but you can actually go to Answers in Genesis's Ark Encounter, and they built a real, actual life-size ark, and it's awesome. I haven't been, but I encourage you to go if you can go. So the construction of this thing, we know, as we'll see, it took 75 years, 80 years to build it, and it was a big project, and that's why it took so long. They had scaffolding and everything. Remember that they were not dumb, that they were much smarter than we are, probably in many ways, living for hundreds of years with technology passed down, including Adam, who was hand made by God himself and lived in the garden and was one of Noah's great, 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 great grandparents. If we look at a drawing, these are all from Answers in Genesis of the ark's cross section. You can see the man there. That it's big. It's really big. There's multiple rooms. There's multiple chambers. There's a opening at the top. There's decks. There's beams. There's frames. There's planking. And this is just labeled according to what Answers in Genesis thinks, that there's food and water on the outside, animal storage in the middle portions, and then again the 3 decks. Here's an artist's rendition of the ark. Here's what it actually looks like in the evening, lit up very cool at the Answers in Genesis site. And just to give you an idea, in the daytime there you can see the people are like ants next to it. That's how big the ark was. It's massive. Some people have put this next to some ancient ships. They've kind of just photoshopped it in there so you can get a size. So it's not as big as some of the modern cruise liners, but it's still very big. And compared to ancient wooden ships of the past, it's much bigger than anything ever. The capacity is 1.4 million cubic feet, capacity of 522 railroad boxcars, and it could contain about 125,000 sheep, which, as we'll see, is more than enough room. Some animal facts. Only 11% of land animals are larger than sheep. So remember that most of the animals on there that would be having to put on board would be small. Noah only had to bring 2 of every kind, not of every species. And there are 700 named dinosaurs, for example, but only 50 kinds of dinosaurs. So that would only be 100. Most of them are very small, like sheep or small horses. And remember that God could have easily brought young animals. Young animals would be smaller. Young animals would eat less. Young animals would poop less and pee less. So we don't know, but that's a good thing to think about, that God could have done that. And maybe he did. We don't know. So the capacity. Again, let's go back 125,000 sheep. We have estimated that at that time there were probably 6,000 to 7,000 kinds total. 1,400 to 1,500 land animals and 5,500 amphibians, reptiles, and birds. Right? And Noah only brought about two of most kinds. There were seven pairs or seven individuals, depending on interpretation of the clean animals mandate that's given there. So Answers in Genesis estimates between 15 to 16,000 individual animals had to be on board, and remember that it could hold 125,000 sheep. So this kind is not something we're going to discuss completely today, but for example, dogs are of the same kind, related to wolves and other animals like that. So they only had to have one kind on, two of every kind on board. 1,000,000 insects could easily fit on the ark if there were that many. And they've really shown that there's plenty of room. There's no room problem, guys. In fact, less than 50% of the space is occupied, as Answers in Genesis shows. And that leaves room for food, storage, and living. Also, for people to have been saved. There was room for more people to get on. But not one person except Noah's family got on board, not one. And remember, looking at the timelines, we've shown that Noah and Noah's father and grandfather, they all have brothers and sisters and grandparents and fathers and parents and relatives living for hundreds of years. There were a lot of people in Noah's line that were still alive, and none of them believed him except the three brothers and the three sons and their wives. Kind of scary. Here's a depiction of the different classifications of animals. We have mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, sea animals, and arthropods, just to name some of them. And we have, genus, family, and species. And Answers in Genesis thinks that the family is probably the closest relation to kind. It doesn't fit exactly. Here you can see the official hierarchy of biological classification. You may remember that. And again, we're thinking that family is the closest, but just the way looking at different kinds and what they are in existence today, they estimate between 6,000 and 7,000. How did Noah find all the animals? Well, he didn't have to. Remember, God said that two of every kind will come to you to keep them alive, will come to you. God brought them. And what's really fascinating to think about is that you had Noah preaching about the flood, and people were probably spectating. They probably had their six-pack of beer on the hill watching Noah and them build, mocking him. But imagine when the animals started to come on their own, right? That there was an animal witness here, guys, where the animals came supernaturally, two by two, and got on the ark. Noah didn't have to go and find them. And at least somebody saw this. You would think that would be enough to be like, whoa, what the heck is going on here? Even the animals know to get on board this ark. But nope, their hearts were hardened. They didn't get on. But don't overlook that animal witness. We're talking about it here to show that Noah didn't have to go find them, that God brought them to him, is what Scripture says. But this also is an interesting point about the animal witness. And there they are. They're headed towards the ark. We've talked about this in a previous lecture, but this just shows the ark building timeline. We remember that the ark came in the 600th year of Noah's life, that he was 500 years old when he had Japheth, Shem, and Ham. And if we just surmise that, they probably had to be about 18 to 20 years old to begin to help in building the ark and be married, because the mandate to get on the ark, as we've shown before, was given to them and their sons. There's probably, if you estimate, about 75 years there to build the ark, not the full 100, as many people wrongly think. So they probably took them about 75 years to build it. In Genesis 7, 11, 12, it says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broke open, and the windows of heaven were open, and rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So the question is, well, where did the water come? Well, it tells you there that some of it came from the fountains of the deep. God had water evidently stored inside the earth that broke open from underneath the ground and came up out of the ground. And then the windows of heaven were opened. And remember that in the very beginning of creation in Genesis chapter 1, there really clearly seems to be described a water canopy that was released onto the earth. And that's why the climates and everything were so different, that after that was gone, the canopy's gone, and the greenhouse effect and all that kind of thing, which we can't get into. But the water came from above and below. So then people say, well, inside the ark, what were they doing? What about food? What about water? What about waste? Well, here's a timeline of the ark and the flood waters, and it shows you, when the waters rose, when they peaked, when the ark landed, all the way till the end. So we know that they were on board the ark for 371 days, if we do the math. 371 days. That's a long time. That's what we want to get from this diagram here. There's more information in it, because you have to explain how did they have food, water, and deal with waste for over a year, just over a year, till they could get off this thing. So let's talk about food. Well, food was explicitly commanded by God. Genesis 6:21, you are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and store it away as food for you and for them. God anticipated the duration. The food storage was intentional, not improvised. And remember that Noah had not just years, but decades to prepare. The animals were younger and smaller. We know that most of them are small in the world, and they're fewer than the modern species, because remember, only kinds had to be on board. So this drastically reduces the food volume by having smaller and younger animals, and the numbers that we looked at earlier. Well, what kind of food? Well, we don't know, but we can surmise mostly probably dry, compact food, grain, hay, dried vegetation, pressed fodder, possibly dried fruits or pellets. Why dry food? Has a long shelf life, high calorie density, minimal storage, easy stacking. Think ancient grain storage, not modern refrigeration. And remember, they were highly intelligent. They knew that God gave him more information that's not in Scripture. We don't know, but possible. Answers in Genesis has some published calculations. Again, the ark volume, 1.5 million cubic feet. The estimated food stored needed was about 15 to 20% of the ark volume. And the remaining space was for animals, walkways, waste management, and living quarters. So food storage was large, but still well within capacity. Again, if you go to see the ark encounter, you can see all this firsthand. Is there a water problem? Remember, you can go for a long period of time without food, but less than a week without water, or you die. So what about storing? Well, we think they stored fresh water in large ceramic or wooden containers, possibly stone-lined tanks. Rainwater was collected early in the flood, and water was probably stored before they even boarded. So they stored it before they could collect it during the flood. And then rainwater collection during the flood. Well, rain fell for 40 days, heavy precipitation early on. They probably had simple collection systems. They had roof runoff and channeling systems in the containers. And then the Lord probably provide later rain to provide water. In other words, once the big storm was over and the flood was over and the ships just kind of floating around for months and months on the seas, we know that the climates changed, and after that there were rain and storms, and probably they had rain, and God gave them rain, and then they used their collection systems to collect fresh water on an ongoing basis. Some people also talk about condensation inside the ark. There's also metabolic water from food. Animals get water from moisture in food. But water was not a problem between the rain at the beginning, rain after the flood, and water collection systems. It would not have been difficult. Here we're back to our graph, just showing that they were able to collect rainwater for those 221 days after the ark landed. So remember, the ark landed on day 150. They didn't get out until day 371. They were on board for 221 days, just sitting on top of the mountain. And if there were rainstorms and rain, they could have easily collected water, and I'm sure that they did. How about reduced consumption due to animal behavior? Well, maybe the animals were calmer than normal, less active, possibly in a divinely induced state of dormancy, not hibernation, but reduced metabolism. This lowers food intake, water needs, and waste output. I mean, the flood is a supernatural event, the whole thing. And God is completely sovereign and he's supernaturally natural. I mean, your heart is beating, your cells are functioning because God is God and holds all creation together. So there's no reason to think, or it's not God invoking to say that God probably slowed their metabolisms or put them in a calm state of dormancy or peace for this ark salvation event because it was God's flood. Well, how about animal waste? Well, we don't know, but if you go to the Ark encounter, I'm going to show you this. There's a small picture on the right, but I'm going to blow it up. They surmised that there were gravity-fed systems of slightly sloped floors, removable trays, chute directing waste downward to a central area. There may have been manure drop shafts. The waste falls to a lower deck. It could be shoveled or removed periodically. And this would relate it to water and waste. Here's this from Answers in Genesis and their site. Again, if you go and see the Ark encounter, you can see all this. It's really interesting. But it was simple engineering. It's not that difficult. Let's blow it up here. Let's look at the waste. This is numbers 3 and 4. To simplify urine removal, it could easily have drained down sloping floors into a system of bamboo pipes. Animal-powered pulleys could then dump the liquid and solid waste into a cavity inside the ship that opened into the ocean, called a moon pool inside modern vessels. And that's shown in numbers 3 and 4. You can see, if you look underneath the decks, the little pipes going down, connecting to a pipe that runs into the central storage container for urine. And here's the bottom part of that picture where you can see an animal is being used to use a pulley system to help move things along, and then it connects in a large container which probably had a way of dumping it. Water was probably related. They could gather the fresh water into cisterns. You can see up there, number 1, that rain, there was a way to connect the rainwater. It's directly connected to the decks below, and a place to channel it and collect it. They could also use that for washing, and then they had, bamboo pipes or simple valves. Who knows? Remember, they were workers of metal. They could have even had more sophisticated metal tubes and piping. So let's move on now. Was it a global catastrophic flood? We shouldn't really even have to talk about this. But there are modern Christian apologists out there, people who are born again Christians, believe in Jesus, and who deny a global flood. I've seen them. I won't name them, but I've heard them and listened to them. And they're basically famous. They're on the speaking circuit. And scripture is clear, as I'm going to show you, and it doesn't make any sense for a local flood. So why do they talk about this? Because they fear man. They fear the rejection of man, the criticism of man. They fear that they won't get as many speaking engagements, that they won't be put on TV, and all these things. That's the bottom line reason. They're fearing man. They want to be popular. They want to be accepted. So it was not a local flood. A local flood is, quite frankly, stupid. It doesn't make any sense. It is the most unintelligent thing based upon the scripture and the fossil record that I've ever seen or heard of with regards to the early chapters of Genesis. So let's look at these flood facts. Let's just look at some scripture here from Genesis 7. And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high mountains that were under the whole heaven were covered. Verse 20, the water prevailed 22 feet higher, and the mountains were covered. So I ask you, can a local flood cover the mountains by 22 feet for a year? How fast would a local flood dissipate? Remember that water flows to the point of least resistance. So even if you had a big valley or somewhere where there's a flood, how long would that water stay there? Not long. It would have to be a global flood for the water to stick around a long time. It had to be everywhere. And look at what the Lord chose as his wording. All the mountains were under the whole heaven were covered. And then he says 22 feet higher than the mountains. That's high. He went out of his way to tell us it was a global flood. Just believe scripture. Come on. Look at verse 21. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds and cattle and beasts, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man, all in whom the nostrils was the breath of life. All that was on the dry land died. So he destroyed all living things which were on the face of the ground, both man and cattle, creeping thing, bird of the air. They were destroyed from the earth. Only Noah and those who were with him on the ark remained alive. What else could God in his word put to make sure people understood it was global? Nothing. It's like he's going out of his way, putting adjective and adjective, descriptor after descriptor in there because he knew people in the modern world would say it wasn't a global flood. So the question is motive. What's the motive? Why don't people want to believe in a global flood? When it's clear what it says, why would you deny it and try and get out of it? Well, I talked about this in another video, but the answer is easy. It's people don't want to admit that God will judge the world. And this is evidence that he already has. And if he already has, then he will again. Remember that if Noah's Ark and the global flood is true, it is the greatest and most drastic judgment by God in human history. Potentially millions, if not billions of people died because they would not believe in Noah and what he said. Okay, so people don't want to admit that. People don't want to, they want to go about their everyday lives, go to the mall, put gas in their car, go to church cookout events, but they don't want to admit that God can judge the world, and so people try and get rid of it. How about Noah's rainbow covenant? Look what verse 11 says. Thus I will establish my covenant, this is from chapter 9, with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I set my rainbow in the cloud. It shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall be when I bring a cloud over the earth that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud. And I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living thing, every living creature of all flesh. The water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. The rainbow shall be in the cloud. I will look to it unto remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and you and all flesh that is on earth. And so again, does this make sense for a local flood? Why would God make such a promise and sign if it was a small local flood? It doesn't make any sense. So I put this in here because you'll hear this. It is silly. It doesn't make any sense, but now you know the motive and why. So I hope this helps. All of the questions are easily answered. We didn't get into all of them. There are many other questions that people ask about this. I turn you to Answers in Genesis for most of them and to go see the Ark Encounter yourself. Have a good day.